And welcome everybody to the Bangers and Classics podcast. And I'm not sure, is it 2022 now, or am I baffled like last time?
Well, I was watching UFO last night, and it's
Yeah.
1980, so I'm just going to go with that. So
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I
it's
think we're actually in
1980.
1980. Yes, this is the alternative 1980.
Yeah, that's right. We've
So we
got
can
lots
probably
to
settle
look
for that.
forward to. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, we've got lots of things, but Audi Quattro to look forward to.
yeah,
Lots of great things and some great 80s music
yeah.
to look forward to. Well,
Wow,
it's all good.
it's turned out
Um,
nice again, hasn't
it's turned out not bad,
it?
not bad. I mean, there's a few things we can change,
Yeah.
but we'll we'll do that another day. Because lots of things to enjoy first.
No,
We'll
absolutely.
We'll get the
So,
relaxation done first until about 1989, then we'll change everything around.
yeah,
Anyway, James, this is the first podcast, or the second, of
yeah,
2022,
right.
and I think we should start off with some news. I believe a certain car firm down your way has ceased to produce certain vehicles. That firm being Lotus, and they seem to have stopped production of the Elise, Exige, and Evora. You get any comment on that, James?
Well, I don't know. It's another bizarre thing. It's sort of the three cars they have that sort of work really. We could talk all day about how to market a car, and as you know, David, being a Lotus expert, that's not something they've always excelled at. And it seems really, really strange, doesn't it? I know the Elise has always cost a bit of money um, to actually buy, but in the same way that Porsche continue making that 911. You would have thought that this is Lotus's biggest hit of the 90s and the 2000s and the 210s. They might as well keep going. Just develop it a bit more. I don't know. I know they've spun off all sorts of different versions, but it seems a very odd decision to make to me to retire the Elise when it's one of the cars that they're best known for. I don't think anybody could care less about the Evora at all, really. Which is obviously a shame, but it just seems like another one of those odd decisions. So I'm not quite sure what they're going to make now.
Well, a
Yeah,
couple of things lined up. They've
yeah,
got the new car coming this year,
mm,
the Emira, which
yeah,
is internal combustion engine, but I believe it's going to be about 76 grand.
mm,
Great,
yeah,
wonderful. Uh, I'll have two, thanks. Actually, no, I won't. Then you've got the what's the other one called? The Evija.
mm.
I don't like these new names, I must say.
No, they're not good, are
No,
they?
they're not strong names at all.
Yeah,
Elise was a strong name. Elan, Eclat,
Esprit, yeah, it was
Esprit, yeah,
fantastic.
they were
Yeah,
strong names, but they
mm,
seem to have lost their way with that. I mean, the Elise, I have to say, for a bare bones sports car, which really is what it was,
yeah,
they
yeah,
didn't have to charge a lot of money for it.
yeah.
And
That's
I
right.
think they cut off a little bit, or certainly a good proportion, of the possible market,
Mm,
because people would say, I can't afford that, or I can't justify that
yeah,
for, a car that is of limited practicality, no matter how much fun it is to drive.
mm,
And yeah, it's a lot of fun to drive if
yeah,
you can fit in it, which of course I struggle to. No surprise again. But that's why there's a strong second-hand market in the leases, I suppose, because
mm,
they're a bit more affordable, and people say,
yeah,
"Well, okay, second car, high days, holidays, etc. Yeah, I'll have some of that." But they've moved up market again, and the last time they did that was back in the days of the wedges,
that's right.
um, and again, it didn't really work out quite so well for them at that period.
No, it
I
didn't,
don't
did
think,
it?
but
No, it
perhaps this
didn't.
time will be different. Perhaps it'll
Yeah.
be different. We'll have to
Well,
wait and see.
Well, maybe David, we could do a Graham Nern. Maybe we should buy the Elise and put the Bangers and Classics name on it. We obviously we can't call it an Elise, but we could call it something else. An Elsie.
I was going to call it a Fred,
Oh, I
just for
call
the
it an
heck of it. Yeah,
Elsie.
you would too.
A Bangers and Classics Elsie. There you
We
go.
could. What we're going to sell it for a tanner.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, anyone of a certain age will know what I'm talking about. Anyone not of a certain age will think he's gone off on one again. He's lost the plot again.
Yeah.
And I think both are probably right. Both versions are probably right.
She was a very strong woman, though, David. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, put that
Mm,
Volvo down, honey. That was it.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, could throw a toaster 300 yards, I believe. Yeah. Anyway, moving down the scale in terms of price, at least, I believe someone has bought a bit of a banger recently.
Well, a friend of the show, and I was due to talk to him, but he rings me up, my friend Mark, and obviously I'm never near the phone; it's not charged or whatever, and so I'm a dreadful person to keep in contact with, as you well know, David, having rung me a few times, and I'm going, who? because you only work in the context of talking to you on a podcast. But yeah, our friend Mark has bought a banger, and it's a Vauxhall Astra. It cost him 250 quid, and it's a CDX. So he's even got a CD changer in it. So he's really gone for it there. I'm
Right.
not quite sure why he's done that. He doesn't, he can afford more than 250 quid unless his circumstances have changed radically. But I need to talk to him about this in more detail. But he said he now feels that he's worthy of this podcast. He does actually own a banger. So we will find out more details about that and whether it's broken down or not. But it looked very good in the pictures he sent me.
Right. Well, we'll have to see some of those.
Mm,
If Mark can share them with us, that'd be wonderful. We'd
yeah.
like to see those. Well, we covered the news, James. What about car spots? I have seen absolutely nothing of interest
Mm.
the last few days. Mind you, I've not been out much, but people are hiding their cars away now. They're hiding the classics, and to an extent, they're also hiding the bangers away. It would seem.
Well, you say that, David, but I've been piling the miles on over the last week or so, and I know we're in 2022 or 1980, as you like to call it. But on Christmas Day, actually, when I was out and about, I saw an MGB GT.
Oh,
It was a rubber bumper, right, and it also had the black sills. So when people used to paint the sills black because there was a lot of rust involved. It was one of those, and also it looked well used. It really wasn't a restored one. It was one that somebody is obviously using on a wet, windy, and quite cold Christmas day. And so it was bright yellow. It was the sort of mimosa yellow, I think, or whatever yellow it was. So that was spectacular to see that. And also the next day, I saw a Triumph TR4A with a hardtop. So somebody again was out in the rain, out in the cold, and using it, but that looked a lot more splendid compared to the MGB GT. The MGB GT was definitely a banger stroke classic. So it was obviously a used. It was in a bit rough condition, but the TR4A was a wonder of it was white, lots of chrome on show, and it was splendid to see that. And finally, a banger in traffic on the M25. It was a Chrysler Crossfire.
oh,
But a Chrysler Crossfire, yeah, with the hood up. PT, no, that's it's a Chrysler PT Cruiser, not a Crossfire.
oh dear.
Yeah, Pisa, yeah, with the hood up, and the fascinating thing about that, because we were in slow traffic, I could drink in the majesty of the PT Cruiser, but the roll bar is actually inside the rear quarter window. It's completely bizarre, and it's something I've never noticed before. So instead of it sort of being integral to the design of the outside, it's actually behind glass. So
Right.
it's a quite disconcerting thing. It looks as though it's all completely wrong, which of course it is. And that's the one thing I was able to marvel at as we crawled along the M25 for a bit.
Well, there's an obvious question I've got to
Mm,
ask you.
yeah.
Did you make an offer for it?
No, I didn't. No.
Oh, come on, James. Zed said, "Top man, you've got to do it."
uh, No, I mean, in many ways, it just confirmed what a sort of compromised vehicle it is. Really, it's neither one thing or the other. I don't know really,
Hmm.
but I suppose it's interesting. At least it's not boring. But
Hmm.
that was quite
Well, that's
weird.
true. Yeah, it is kind of weird. It was going to be a Plymouth originally.
Yes, it
That's where the
was,
P.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
Mm,
that's where the P comes from.
yeah.
And when Chrysler decided that no, Plymouth was gone, they didn't take the P from it. Didn't take the P
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah.
Oh well, please yourselves. There you go. First bad joke of the new year.
Uh,
Uh, anyway, on that somewhat bum note,
Hold
let's
on.
take a break.
Okay.
This is Bangers and Classics, the official podcast of 1980. And we are back after the break. The car we're going to talk about as a banger or classic is the Audi 80.
Hmm.
So, what are your thoughts on it, James? Is it a banger or is it a classic?
Well, yeah, it is very weird in that, when I think of an Audi 80, I think of the 78 one. Even though, as you pointed out to me, there was an 80 before that. I mean, in many ways, it wasn't a 3 Series, and it wasn't sort of terribly exciting. I know, when you got the 90, it did, but it was just a sort of very efficient sort of square saloon, from the Volkswagen Group, effectively. But at least it proved that Audi were going places. They were very, very, very good. Uh, we had 100 at home, an early 100, so that was a 1972 one. So I was always very familiar with Audis, and they were sort of very, very pared back. They didn't go over the top when it came to extras and so forth. They sort of just got on with the business of working, really, which is all you ever wanted in the 1970s from a car. So yeah, I mean, to me, it was very, very efficient, not very special, and it was just something that was sort of a good German saloon, rather than to get
All right.
excited about. But you're right. I think it became a lot more special in the later 80s.
Hmm. Well, the one I'm concentrating on is the one that came along in about 86 or 87.
Yeah,
And that was one, it was a good looking car. And
yeah,
Audis these days, I have to say, are not good looking cars. I was following one again today and I thought, what are you doing? I mean, some of them get bajunki light indicators, sequential indicators,
yeah,
which are ludicrous. And the one I was following today has got a very pissing rear end, and the rear lights just look like a mess. It looked like something off a very cheap kids' toy car from the 1980s or 90s. And I thought, no, this isn't it. You actually cracked this years ago, guys. You had a great formula. Go back to it because you're going the wrong direction. Of course, lots of people buy them. Lots of people love them. Are great for aspirational types, whatever they are. And judging by the way some of them are driven, I think too many people have passed their driving tests or whatever. But there we go. Anyway, go back to the one I actually like. It comes along in the 80s.
yeah.
It's got a galvanized body shell, which is a big advance forward in terms of dealing with dust. And it was a nice car to drive. 80 was joined by an identical car, effectively identical looking car, to all intents and purposes, a 90, which basically was a slightly upmarket 80 with some very slight styling tweaks and more powerful engines. So you had quite a good range of cars from a cooking car up to really a quite high performance quattro, and it covered all the bases, looked good, and I think it was a decent handling car as well. To be honest, with the exception of 3 Series Bauer Cabriolet, I would take the Audi 80 over a BMW 3 Series of that time every time. I just think so as a better car, from all sorts of angles. As I say, looks, from build quality, it's got all the bases covered. But here's a little bit of a nugget for you, James.
Mm.
You know that there was never an Audi 80 sold in America.
No.
Wow. Because when it was launched in the USA, it was sold
Yep.
as the Audi Fox.
Mm.
And this gave rise to a situation where the Volkswagen Group sold a fox and a rabbit in North America. Now, why
Goodness
they
me.
changed the name, I don't know. It then became the Audi 4000, which seems a silly name, from about 1980. And then in 1987, it finally becomes the Audi 90.
Mm.
But the Audi 90, so you never actually got an Audi 80 in America. And of course, it became the A4. I don't really see that as a great advance, calling a car an A4, calling it after a sheet of paper, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But that name was used in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
However, going back to the 80 and 90 models from the 80s and into the 90s, yeah, they get my thumbs up as a classic. What about you?
Yeah, no, I would say it's a classic. As you say, compared to what they're doing today, their work today, and that applies to most companies these days.
Mm.
Yeah, their early hits are much better than the albums they're releasing today.
So we'll move on now, and we'll talk about a few more of the greatest things that you used to get in cars, but you no longer do. And these are things we don't think we've talked about in the pod before. I'm going to start you off with one, James.
Mm.
Yellow lights. Do you remember the days when you used to get French cars with yellow lenses on them?
Well, I do very clearly, and I also remember a time when you drove to France, they said it was a good idea to make your lenses yellow. So
Mm.
I remember buying sticky paper. It was a bit like what they used to wrap Lucozade bottles in, and again, you have to be 108 to remember that. But yeah, you would actually stick a film over it. I know it actually wasn't compulsory, but I do remember doing it. probably because it was quite cool. But yeah, when I remember driving on the Continent and sticking those on. But yeah, yellow lights are brilliant.
And that was back in the days, of course, when Lucas
Mm,
had cured everything.
it did cure everything,
Yeah, it
absolutely.
was amazing stuff. I've got a little revelation for you, James.
No,
The lenses, as originally supplied to French
yeah,
car makers, were not yellow.
you're joking.
No, they were
All
clear
right,
lenses.
goodness
But
me.
here's the thing. The workers in the assembly line were such heavy smokers, well, of course, being French, they would be, that the lenses were stained yellow by the time they were fitted to the cars.
Yeah,
And that's why they're yellow.
that's perfectly plausible, isn't it?
It's a
Mm. It's
well-known
a
fact.
it's a fact.
It's a fact, Jack, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on from lights to aerials, and something that actually was quite useful back in the day, you don't see these really anymore either, is electric aerials.
No, you
And
don't. No.
yeah, and the
Mm,
reason they were useful is for car washes. If you're taking it into a proper car wash,
mm,
it was easy to put down. You didn't have to get out of the car and shove the aerial down before you went in. Car wash with the rollers, etc.
yeah.
Whereas nowadays, I wouldn't take my car to a car wash simply because obviously you can't detach the aerial very easily. You can't retract it. You can't take it off, and you're always worried it's going to get damaged or it's going to scrape the roof or whatever. I think that was a piece of technology that we've lost and perhaps we shouldn't have.
Well, there was also a sense of occasion with an electric aerial because you would. It was usually on the front wing. You would watch it rise. It was quite an interesting thing to see happen. You know, you think, well, yeah, I'm connecting with music, and yeah, you would see it rise up, and I always thought that was quite an interesting thing to. Maybe it was just me, but I was always quite excited by it.
Well, what
Um,
you should do is just going back to what we were talking about earlier, is find that PT Cruiser, buy it, fit it
yeah,
with an electric aerial, and you're
yeah.
covered. You've got
Oh,
all the
okay.
bases there.
Well,
And you
you
can
think
stick your
so?
guitars in the back as well.
Well, I don't know about that, David.
Well, you're a bit of
Uh,
an axe man, let's face it, aren't you?
uh, but there was a lot more gubbins to an electric aerial. There was like a motor on it, so when you fitted one, there was actually you had to make sure you had enough space to fit it under your wing, which was usually mostly rust anyway.
Well, there'll be a lot of space then, probably, where
Yeah,
metal used to be.
yeah.
But yeah, electric aerials, but I did like those.
Mm,
Another thing I miss is map reading lights.
mm,
I remember the Matra Bagheera, some models that were sold here had one, and it was a very simple thing, a little handheld wand, effectively,
mm.
light on it. Of course, we don't use maps anymore, which again perhaps is a bit of a pity there too.
Yeah.
We're relying on satellite navigation as opposed to planning our own routes. I mean, sat nav can be very good. Let's be honest, it can help, but sometimes feel that we're letting technology, machinery do everything for us instead of getting off our backsides and doing it ourselves.
Well, there's a lot to be had there. That yeah, people don't know how to get where they're going, and they will just blindly listen to a sat nav. I mean, that's one. I do know people who do not use sat navs. They are so old school. They actually look on maps before they go somewhere, so they actually research it before they go on a journey, which is what we all used to do once upon
Mm.
a time. If you were travelling certainly out of your manor, out of your area, you looked at maps, and yeah, a map reading light was absolutely crucial for your co-driver.
I wrote a short story about a satellite navigation system.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called, was it Lot 257 or something?
Mm,
Yeah, it was up on my website briefly, but I took it down because I put it onto a little book of short stories.
yeah.
But that's about a satellite navigation system. You might think that's a strange thing to write about, and well, I don't think so. I think it
Mm,
actually worked in that story.
yeah.
Not that anybody actually bought the book to read it,
Yeah.
mind you, but not to worry. So there we go. So that's three great things I think that we've lost: map reading lights, electric aerials, and
Mm,
yellow light lenses.
yeah.
And can we have them all back, please?
Yes, please. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Well,
I think we'll.
David, I mean, if our car company comes about, never mind about remaking old Lotuses, they will come equipped with all those useful extras.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Anyway, on that note, we'll take another break. You're listening to Bangers and Classics, presented by the two men at the top of Interflora's Most Wanted list. So you join us for the last segment of this week's podcast. This week's challenge is not to find a classic, but it's to find a banger instead. The price limit of the banger is £700. It has to have an MOT. That's about it. Now, I'm not confident here. outdoing Mr. Rupert. He is the high prince of Bangonomics and many other things besides, so my effort will look feeble in comparison. So with that in mind, let's hear what James has got.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, David. I mean, Mark's beaten us all this week. I mean, he's actually gone and bought a car for 250 quid, which is the CDX. Wow. I had a look around, and oddly enough, because we were going to talk about Audis, I fetched up with an Audi A4 from 2000, 1.8 SE. It's 495 quid, so it's well below the threshold. So I've got money to spare to fix it, but it's a dealer sort of part exchange where they want shot of it. But the last owner's had it for 10 years. So there's quite a lot of history with it, and it seemed a sort of a fairly straight car. 131,000 miles. There is a light on. But I've got one of those machines that turns lights out. Not that I'm very successful with turning lights out, I found.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Is it a Belinda Carlisle special edition? Leave a light on for me.
Leave a light on, yeah.
Sorry, James, I interrupted again.
No, that's okay. But I just like the idea of it. It just seemed like quite a smart A4 saloon. So instead of going for an 80, I've gone for an A4. It's offspring, it's 1.8 SE, so it's petrol. It's very straightforward. It should be reasonable enough to run. There shouldn't be a lot to go wrong with it, and anything that seems to be wrong with it, I don't know, doesn't seem to be causing it any trouble. But I just thought, well, we'll take a punt on it, and there's a few hundred quid just in case. So
right.
So I went for that, but I'm sure you've got a far better way of getting around in Bangerdon than that.
Do you know when Audi introduced the A4, they said they designed it using a clean piece of paper?
Did they?
No.
It was
they
a
should
clean
have.
sheet, was it?
Yeah, it was a clean sheet.
Clean sheet.
Clean sheet, yes. Anyway, I went for a German car as well.
Oh, good.
Not really. I'm not buying one for myself because I wouldn't buy this one because I don't like German cars much, as you know.
Yeah.
But this is a Mercedes C220 CDI Classic SE Estate with an automatic gearbox. It's up in Gumtree of all places just now
right.
for 700 of your pounds.
Yeah.
And it's done about 223,000 miles. Because it's a 220 diesel, it's got a 2.2 diesel engine.
Yeah.
It's a 2005 model. It is an MOT until August of next year. And I looked at the MOT history. There's nothing really in terms of advisories or anything significant over the period covered by the computerized MOT history. The last MOT, there were 2 advisories, some playing a couple of ball joints, and that was it. The mileage does jump about a bit. It jumps up by about 58,000 one year, but it seemingly drops 13,000 the next. So maybe the garage has recorded that incorrectly. I don't know. Obviously, you'd have to see, I think, the paper documentation just to check that out. The advert is very, very light on detail, so I don't know what sort of service history it's got. Don't know how many owners it's got. It looks okay in the ad, but what you are getting is a large estate. It's probably good for crunching large mileages. Even at 220,000, there should be some life left in it. And for £700, well, what are you going to get for 700 quid? Let's be honest.
Well, exactly.
So that's what I've gone for. You might be able to beat the seller down a little bit. Who knows? So there we go. We both went for German cars, but I think James has yet again taken the cake in that one.
I don't know. I've got a light on mine, David. So at least the dealer was honest enough to say that. But I'd like to think, 10 years ownership, it's in reasonable nick, and we can sort it out. So there you go. It's a bit of work.
Absolutely. We're moving on from a challenge to a strange story, James.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I like a strange story.
It's a strange story. And this is apparently, it's claimed to be a true story. Again, I don't know if it is or it isn't, but it involves a 1977 Ford LTD. And it was a police car. The story takes place in August 1979 in Minnesota. It's in the part of Minnesota known as Marshall County. And a police officer was driving the vehicle in the early hours of the morning, and it was on, I think, quite a remote road. It was a state highway, but there was any other traffic around at the time. And as he drove along, a very bright, brilliant light came towards him. And it seemed to be about 4 feet above the ground and had very defined edges according to the police officer. He thought, was it a small aircraft making an emergency landing? However, this light then accelerates towards him apparently and basically hits his patrol car. And he says he blacked out. And when he came to, the car is about 800 feet from where we last remembered being and is now side onto the road. And there were brake marks in the road. So it looks as if someone had applied the brakes. And yeah, he looked at the time on the dashboard and he seemed to have been out for about 40 minutes. Because this, he said, happened at just before 2 a.m., about 20 to 2. And when he looked at the clock on the dashboard, it was 2:19. But there were various other things. And the car was obviously recovered. He called for assistance, and there are pictures of the car taken in situ. And he was taken to hospital. And it said that he had damage to his eyes, which would be similar to that a welder might experience whilst welding if he wasn't wearing proper goggles.
Goodness me.
Other thing was, both his wristwatch and the clock on the patrol car were 14 minutes slow. Now, there was some physical damage to the vehicle itself. The windscreen was smashed. The roof antennas were bent out of shape, which could be due to something impacting them. Apparently, an expert from the Ford Motor Company did examine the vehicle and said that the crack patterns on the car and the apparent series of fractures seemed to be inward and outward forces acting almost simultaneously. Now, that's on the windscreen. Who knows what happened that night? But still, nonetheless, it's an interesting story. It could have happened the way the officer said. It could have been something else entirely. But I think it's unlikely he falsified it. So something happened on that road. And it involved a car. So therefore, we can talk about it on the podcast.
Absolutely.
If you look up Val Johnson UFO Marshall County, and you can find pictures of the car because it's still there. It's been preserved. And why not? It's a tourist attraction, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'd go and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in that area, yeah, of course you would go and see it. Let's face it, it's a rare car to begin with these days. Anyway, talking of other rare cars, there's a Dangermobile that I'm a bit surprised about.
Yeah.
That's the Montego. Now, I always thought it was a bit strange to name a car after a biscuit. Because you remember, right at the time the Montego was brought out, there was a biscuit called the Montego as well.
I don't remember the Montego biscuit at all.
Yeah, Yep, they were very popular. It was one of the big companies brought it out, the Montego biscuit. Obviously named after Montego Bay, which I think in Jamaica, if memory serves me right. But anyway, as at the last quarter recorded, only 111 Austin and Rover Montegos are registered as being on the road. There's a bunch more in Sorn. There's a lot more in Sorn, but it's just over 100 that were on the road. And I think that was during the summer. So that's not great news. I mean, these cars were hugely popular at one time. There was a lot of them about. I did criticise the Montego at the time. A friend of mine had a Montego estate. I think it was known as a Montego Countryman, if memory serves me right.
Yes.
Yeah. And boy, did he take a slagging off about that. But that was a bit unfair. There were some good points about the Montego. The MG Turbo version, which certainly went well in a straight line.
Yeah.
It was a very spacious estate version. It was a pretty decent effort all round. I don't think it looked great. I'm not a big fan of 3-box cars, but I think it looks. I suppose, a subjective thing. It didn't look great as far as I'm concerned. If you compare it to the Audi 80 we were talking about earlier, it didn't really compare favourably. And of course, there was a famous TV advert for the Montego. I think it was for the Montego 1.6L. And I believe you have met the gentleman who drove the car in the advert, a chap called Russ Swift.
Well, I'm sure everybody listening has heard of old Russ. I think he's pretty much retired these days, but his son carries on his epic work still. But no, I met him. It was for quite a boring reason, which was I had to go and fire up an old computer to find the story, and it was to do with the British Motoring Heritage Trust when they were remaking body shells. I think it was when they were first doing it for Mark 1s. It was quite some time ago. Or they were Mark 4s, so you had to convert them to look like Mark 1s. You had to cut the lights out and stuff. But old Russ, he had a Mark One Mini Cooper S, and so he was going to reshell it because obviously it had rusted, but it was a nice old one. And he was collecting the shell that day, so it was very nice to actually meet him. He turned up in a Rover 75 and a trailer. He said,
Right.
"Well, take it away." And I read through the stuff I wrote. And it was all quite procedural, boring stuff about how exciting it is that we can all buy one of these. But I asked him, and I didn't put this in the feature. I said, "Well, I said minis are great, aren't they? You know," I said, they are sort of fairly safe. You can steer your way out of trouble." And then what he did, he rolled up his trouser leg, and he had this massive scar right from like the bottom of his leg right up to his knee. And he said, "Well," he said, "there was a time when I think he did it roll end over end in a Mini, but he survived to drive another day." But if anybody's not familiar, he's the most famous for having a car at a jaunty 60-degree angle in a car park. That's when he parked the Montego.
Mm.
And yeah, an extremely good driver, obviously, but made a very good living from doing displays. And he was with this Mini Cooper. I never saw it again, but he was going to convert it and put it into his show. So he was actually quite happy because I remember asking him at the time, and that I did make the feature, was he going to use it and go up on two wheels on it? And he said, yeah, he certainly was, because he thought it would be quite a nice sort of hero car to have in his show. So that was good.
Well, yeah, you could do an Italian job thing with it.
Mm,
I think
yeah,
he actually did, didn't he? Or his son did.
I think he did. Yeah. Oh, yeah. His
Yeah,
son. Yeah,
I think yeah, they
absolutely.
did.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, it was great. If you ever catch some video of Russ, if you ever come across it, do watch it.
mm,
Watch the Montego ad because he
mm.
does all the driving in that, and it is very impressive indeed. I don't know how many takes it took to get it right, but given his ability and given how well he drove when you saw him live,
Yeah.
I would be surprised if it took very many takes, if more than one, to be honest.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Um, and yeah, so do watch that. With so few Montegos left, I would say it's a pretty worthy car. There are some pretty good reasons to buy one, and it's really one of the last cars from the BL era. The age I was then, it wasn't for me. I can perhaps appreciate it more now, and certainly I would say that they're worth saving. So if you're in the market for a classic car, I don't think the prices are too bad in them yet. And you get offered a Montego or you see one, you think, yeah, why not? Go for it. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Just don't pretend you're Russ Swift because, unfortunately, you probably ain't.
No, most of us aren't Russ Smith at all. But
I mean, obviously you are, James. I mean, you're everybody.
I
This is
don't
it.
think. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think I would be Russ Smith. I think if I tried to run a car on two wheels, I may have only done a car on two wheels completely by accident, but certainly not by any design at all. I think it's an immensely clever thing to be able to do.
And what about your annual stunt show at Rupert
Yeah,
Towers? When you do it in the Land Rover. I
goodness
mean,
me.
you're hiding your light under a bushel again or something.
No, I don't think so, David. No, no,
Maybe it's the
no.
light you've got. Maybe it's the light
You
on that Audi A4. Maybe
got
that's
well
what hiding
then.
under a bushel. Anyway, this is the first Bangers and Classics podcast of 2022, and it's the end
Mm,
of the first Bangers and Classics podcast of 2022. So, just like to say thank you for listening. I wish you all, of course, a very happy new year. I hope you had a great time, and hopefully this year is going to be a heck of a lot better for all of us.
yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. 1980 is shaping up to be one hell of a year.
Absolutely. Interceptor's immediate launch. And on that note, cheerio.
Yeah, cheerio, everybody.